All right, everyone, welcome. This is Filecoin Core Devs meeting number 52. Today is Thursday, the 1st of December, and the final Core Devs meeting that we have scheduled for 2022. Today, we're going to kick off with a conversation led by Jennifer about the NV18 upgrade scope. Then Alex North is going to lead us into a conversation about some changes he'd like to see to FIP acceptances and quantifying gas costs. And last but not least, I'm going to walk us through some of the updates we've been discussing for a few months about core devs. This is mostly just a reminder about some documentation updates you're going to see, and want to very quickly introduce some small tweaks to the way we think about FIP acceptance to help support us as we prepare for some upcoming crypto econ FIPs. Again, lots to discuss, so let's start and hand it over to Jennifer.
Hi. I'm gonna try to be fast, but we just shipped the Shark NV17 upgrade. It's live on the network. Congrats, everyone! Again, the network is well alive and seems to be working. So that's great. But I do want to get aligned on what NV18 is gonna be about, what the timeline looks like before we get into the winter or like summer holiday for some folks, and also just like to align on like what's the next steps. So I think from the past couple of months, core devs are on a soft consensus that NV18 Falcon NV18 upgrade is going to be mainly about launching FEVM into the Filecoin network. And we are expect most FIPs to be finalized, to be surrounded by FEVM. So that being said, I have listed a list of the FIPs that FVM team is about to create. And I believe if you actually go to the deck, the links are clickable, so you can take a look in that. The only non-FVM FIP that we are proposing to finalize is FIP 47, the POREP policy, security policy. This FIP is in fact already accepted, and the Lotus team do feel like we have the bandwidth to actually land that work for the Filecoin network. That's why we are proposing to include this FIP within the NV18 upgrade. So that's the scope. If you want to add more FIPs into that, in the last slide, there's a link to the TPM forum where you can propose anything else, or correct me if I got things wrong. So on the next slide, so I only had about 48. I started to work on this about 48 hours ago while shipping NV17. So this is my first initial proposal of what the network upgrade tentative timeline can look like. Thank you for the FVM team, especially Match and Step, and also Ayush and also Casely from the governance side to help me to have this initial proposal. So for each network upgrade, there are two basically parallel track. The first one is being engineering, the other one is being governance. So currently, for the development timeline, the projection is mainly based on the FEM and Lotus and Actor engineering resources that I am aware of, and also the things that I heard from people that want to deliver. So feedbacks, especially from the Venus team and the Forest team, are super welcome. I also try to factor in that a lot of people are taking 2 weeks off at the end of the year to celebrate, and also next year at the end of January, there's a long holiday in Asia, especially China, the Chinese New Year, that our community will be less available to support network upgrades. So those are factoring already. So for the development, other than the code freeze for each implementation, the FEM team is going to launch a hyperspace developer testnet on December the 8th as a part of pre-production testnet. There's a link in the later slide that you can read more about it. I'm hoping to lock down the NV18 FIP scope by December the 9th. Any new FIPs that needs to be considered, because there's no other FIPs that's already accepted. So any new FIPs started from now is going to be a new draft that needs to go through the whole governance process and also need engineering resources to implement on. That's why I'm hoping that anything that folks, the community want us to consider can be proposed before December the 9th. I am, because like the built-in actor is a code base that shared by all the implementers, including Lotus, Venus, and Forest. I do want to have a shared code-free deadline for everyone so that implementations can plan accordingly. And that date right now, I'm proposing it to be January the 6th. And from the FEM team, I'm told that FEVM audits is going to be done, both the internal and external audits is going to be done by January the 16th. And having everything being said, I'm hoping after January the 6th, all the implementation team can start integrate with the actor and start to do implementation things, and we can work towards a calibration upgrade on January the 26th. With that timeline being set, we probably can target a mainnet upgrade sometime around mid-February. On the governance side, Caitlin and I worked really closely on that, but this is, again, a super high level, like potential timelines. So to make the engineering to actually be able to deliver all the FIPs, we need all the FIPs draft to be open at latest December the 13th, the sooner the better. And for the FIP to go through the whole governance process, this doesn't apply to emergency FIP or crypto econ FIP. December 22nd is when all the FIPs should be moved to last call, so it can be accepted by January the 5th. And then we can land all the changes into the built-in actor code base. I see a couple hands, so I'm going to stop first. Molly?
Yeah, can you clarify the date alignment? What's the difference between December 9th, which is scope lockdown, which sounds like we've decided what's in the upgrade as a community, versus December 22nd, all NV18 FIPs shall move to last call by this date? I don't understand those two.
December the 9th is like what, yes, you can propose anything that you want to potentially be included in NV18, and the December the 22nd is whatever is getting proposed has gone through the governance process and ready to move to last call and ready to be finalized into the network. So if there's any like new thing, like say if you propose a FIP after December the 9th, even it goes through the governance process or accepted before like, let's say January the 5th, I don't think the core devs should consider to include that FIPs in NV18, but a later network upgrade.
But then the December 13th date of all NV18 FIPs should be having a FIP draft open. As of that date, these are two different dates that are trying to say the same thing, which is have your drafts open for potential inclusion in NV18. And maybe we should rename that then from like all potential considerations for NV18 are open as of, that early to mid-December timeframe. And then as of late December, right before some folks go out on holiday, is when we aim to try and hit a last call and aim to finalize governance on scope. Correct?
Yes, we can consider that. We can consider that. But yeah, Stephen.
Okay, so yeah, first I want to mention that the Chinese New Year starts at January 22nd. Yeah, it usually many people will take a risk at that time, perhaps about 2 weeks. So yeah, here the calibration upgrade will happen at 26th. It's happens during the holiday, I would think, in China. I would suggest that this could move 1 week ahead, or yeah, just put it into yeah, or may yeah, set it earlier for a week. Yeah, both okay, I would think.
That's a very good point, and was definitely a thing that I was like considering before proposing this date. So maybe like so like some of the things in the next slide may tell you more of like where this date is being proposed, but also like we should definitely align on whether that's the right date. Oh, I don't know why it's cutting off some of the words. But like, that's fine. And so next slide, in this like proposed timeline, I definitely see a couple like challenges and risks that core dev should be like aware of. The first is like the FIP review and acceptance timeline is like super tight. Only a very few FIPs that is supposed to be in NV18 is already draft complete at the moment. And as you all can see, that if all the FIPs actually got open by December the 13th, which is our deadline, FIP editors, core devs, authors really have to be super active on like reviewing the FIP drafts so it can be the last call ready before everyone went to going into the holidays. And also the last call period heavily overlaps with the end of the year holidays. So a lot of FIP editors or like core devs may be a way to actually review the FIPs in a meaningful way. So I think core devs should also discuss whether we should extend the last call period to 3 weeks so people can come back and review the FIPs. And also like there are 2 newly introduced testnet from the FVM team. It's called Wallaby and Hyperspace. Raul was kind enough to describe what those 2 network is for in a GitHub discussion. So click the link there, you will be able to see that. So so those 2 are supposed to be heavily developer focused and testing a lot of to make and hopefully discover bugs by the developers on what it like maybe like bring back like FVM. So back to your question, Stephen. So what we are thinking here is like, because like majority of the testing for this upgrade may be performed by Hyperspace on the Hyperspace testnet, maybe we can shorten the calibration upgrade a little bit, and maybe it's okay to overlap with the Chinese New Year a little bit for this one. But again, that's open for like feedback. By shortening the timeline, I meant, sorry, what do you mean the shortening?
Sorry, I'm responding to Caitlin, who's the comment above, which was, I think Stephen's suggestion was it would be optimal for the calibration community of SPs, a number of whom are in China and would be celebrating Chinese New Year, if the network upgrade happened prior to January 22nd, such that it could land in calibration net, folks could do testing, they wouldn't lose sync and data and all of those things in calibration network, and it wouldn't have, obviously we want to do the mainnet upgrade as soon as Chinese New Year's ends and everyone comes back, and so we don't want to delay any further into the future. If anything, we want to pull forward. And so I guess the question is there a hard gap or timeline or something between last call or something from a governance perspective and when the calibration upgrade happens?
Yeah, calibration upgrade date is mainly dependent on first, like all the FIPS has to be accepted before I think we can introduce it on the calibration, and also like when the implementation teams are ready to share, super close like code freeze release onto the calibration. Again, we don't want to kill the calibration. It's the only pre-mainnet production ready network. So far, the Lotus team feel like we can ship the first RC like a week and a half, I believe, before the calibration upgrade, which gives the Chinese community at least like 3 to 4 days to upgrade their nodes before we move into the upgrade. Again, but this is something we have to discuss with like Venus and more. Ayush?
Yeah, I just want to say, from my perspective, this timeline is extremely tight as it is, and I'm worried about kind of unknown work that might emerge that we're not budgeting enough time for. So, yeah, I think this is already difficult to achieve, and I would push back against attempts to move dates forward.
Yeah. This I need to like sync with Venus and Forest team again to understand their engineering resources, but this already requires some of the Lotus engineers to only take 1 week off for the winter holiday. So we're trying our best here. Stephen?
Yeah, from the Venus point of view, okay. Yeah, first, I was saying the governance is very important. I agree that we need to have all the FIP accepted next month, so that before the holiday, so that all the team know that what we need to achieve. And the second is that okay. My understanding is that this network upgrade is for is to enable the FEVM and we could have Ethereum compliant user programmable actors to run on this new version, right? So we need to keep that in mind, and so that I would expect that there would be many testing to fulfill in the calibration or in the hyperspace tested. I'm not sure if that we just keep 1 month is enough for this. But anyway, we could have some testing on hyperspace, which might be okay. But I agree that it's kind of tight. This schedule. It's because it's not like before, right? Before we only have the consensus or network level upgrade. We do not need to run any user actors to do the testing.
I agree. I know Ro has a hand. Testing is definitely super important, and the FEM team has been, working on a testing plan for a really long time. Because like we have other topics to cover in this like CodeApp call. I'm wondering, Ro, if you can share your like detailed test plan with CodeApp async.
Yeah. Oh, well, I was just gonna give a few notes on kind of like awareness on key headlines here, and then I can elaborate on that in the channel if you want me to. So this is the first network upgrade where the environment is being tested continuously through Wallaby. We've been having just in the last 2 weeks, we had over 2,000 contract deployments on Wallaby as a result of HackFevim. So that is something that is already changing versus past testing flows. We will be having hyperspace as well. We are planning a hackathon that will be announced in the next weeks for the timeframe of January to the beginning of February. We need to see exactly how that aligns with the timeline that is being presented here to understand how much testing density and testing traffic we're going to see on hyperspace as a result of that. Another thing that we've been working on is we're lining up developers to develop automated testing suites for that, basically port contracts from other networks into the Filecoin network and create test vectors that have been extracted from other networks into to play them against the Filecoin network and FEVM specifically. So we do expect to have a level of automatic real world testing there as well. So those are just some of the key testing headlines here, but I can elaborate more in the channel.
Thank you for all the context. Most like heavy FEVM testing, we're expected to be on Wallaby and hyperspace. So calibration is more for developers. If they want, they can join that as well. And like calibration is more for storage provider and implementation team to make sure the migration, the upgrade can go smoothly. The last thing I will go quick. Some like timeline. Again, we have a very tight timeline. That's why there are some challenges. So on the audits, all the audits are targeted to be complete by January the 16th. While we we expect all the critical bugs will be discovered in the very beginning of the audits, and like, you know, working towards like the end of it, we're expecting less critical bugs being reported. However, the audits are completed after FIP acceptance. So we are all like the beauty actor code freeze. So from the governance process, we are wondering if any refinement needs to be added to an accepted FIP. Is that allowed? I don't think we have a policy for that at the moment. And so the governance TPM probably should discuss that like async later on. And any audits that, you know, anything found on the audits may impact development timeline as always. And the crypto, another huge thing is like the community and core devs are all like super, are looking forward to what kind of the gas impact that user deployed contract may bring to the Filecoin network. Again, this is a new thing for the network, and crypto econ lab has been doing this analysis in the past couple of weeks, and they're currently aiming to deliver the analysis and the report and suggested next steps by December the 18th, which is right before a lot of the core engineers, core devs to be off to the holidays. So a couple risks here is like, do the core devs do have enough time to meaningfully like review the analysis before confirming the gas model FIP can be accepted? Can be in last call, and what's the decision-making process on whether a solution has to be landed in the network before we even ship FDM in an upgrade. So those are the two challenges that core devs should absolutely like discuss, maybe offline. And so I think that's it. Again, if you have any questions, if you have any concerns, let's raise it in the core dev channel or even in the public TPM forum. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. All right, we have kind of a tight schedule today, so let's pass it over to Alex, who is going to keep us on train talking about governance, discussing FIP implementations and acceptance sequencing.
Thanks. I've already posted this whole thing in public, so I'm not going to talk through all the bullet points here. I assume everyone has had a chance to see this in the FIP discussion forum or the core devs chat. But there's a tension that's became quite apparent with FIP 45 between how much we do implementation prior to writing a FIP, so that we can write the specification, knowing, informed by knowing how at least one implementation would work, versus the process of writing and having a FIP governance proceed first to give, to set the spec for the implementation and to give implementers the mandate, the confidence that when they commit months of work to doing the implementation, that's going to be worth something, because the network has indicated they want this change. This particularly came up because FIP 45 had impacts on the gas costs of publishing deals, but these gas costs concretely were not known until after FIP acceptance. But had we known them beforehand, perhaps we would have done things slightly differently. They're larger than we would have liked. Perhaps we would have spent more time on optimization. Possibly that would have formed part of the spec, not just an implementation concern. However, the more that we require implementations to be complete, and complete needs definition, the longer processes will take. We still need to leave plenty of room for the discussion. There's no point having I can see sort of some of this happening already with the FEM FIPs, but the discussion and community feedback around a FIP should not be a mere like formality, not a show. There should be actual room for people to object, propose alternatives, have a real discussion. The FIP is not not just a formality. That's actually the process for community consultation. These timelines will all increase if the more implementation work we require before a FIP can reach that stage, which will slow down velocity for everything. Next slide, I think, please. So I want to open a discussion about what should we do here. What other trade-offs are there if we require more or less implementation work? We've done many FIPS, so 40-something FIPS in the past, generally without requiring implementation ahead of FIP acceptance. Hasn't been that bad. I mean, yeah, the question is like, is this really a problem that needs solving? It's possible the answer is no. But how can we generally give the people doing the work confidence that they're doing meaningful work while also keeping standards quite high and supporting meaningful community involvement, community governance, community feedback on the changes that we're making. So let me stop there and open to discussion. Aish.
Yeah, I do have an opinion here, and it may not be a popular opinion with this group. I don't think a one-size-fits-all approach will probably work, but more often than not, I think implementation needs to be in an advanced stage before an informed decision can be made on FIP acceptance. And I think the experience with FIP 45 kind of indicates that. This is obviously unfortunate because it does mean that people working on potentially months-long projects have to at least slightly be open to the possibility that that it doesn't go anywhere or doesn't actually go live in the network. But yeah, there are just a whole host of changes that it's pretty hard to make a governance decision on, just an acceptance decision on, without knowing what the implementation looks like. And gas is a good example of that, and that's kind of what happened with FIP 45. But I do think there are others. So yeah, my nudge is that we slightly have to bite the bullet and implement things while being open to the possibility that they're not going to go live. They are essentially prototypes, and until that implementation is complete, the specification is not complete in some sense, and therefore a decision can't really be made.
Yeah, thanks. Good. I have a lot of sympathy for that point of view. I wonder how consistently. So I see some +1s in the chat as well. We need to think through the implications of that. For example, if we took that seriously, then the immediate implications for the FVM are like, finish implementation, write some FIPS, and have some real community engagement, and maybe we can ship it a quarter later. Because if anything changes, that is this FIP review a show, or is this actually a place for consultation and real design alternatives to be considered? I think it's a tough trade-off there. It's hard to apply the write the FIP first, and then it's like yes no binary decision, or is there room for real consultation? It's a tricky trade-off. Caitlin.
Yeah, actually, Jennifer beat me to it. That she said in the chat that she thinks what's missing is a stage between accepted and finalized. I think this might be a solution. I'm very sympathetic to this ask. I think the challenge is that our driving sort of value for a lot of these upgrades is really oriented around speed, and that's where we tend to have to make a lot of sacrifices for process. I think one of the things that we could potentially do, and we have long needed, is better post-implementation monitoring and mitigation also for FIPS, necessitating or declaring design standards and potential impact scenarios that we expect to see, so that we can more easily make changes, even very, very slight ones, if FIPS aren't operating on the network the way that we anticipate them being. But ultimately, I think what Jennifer first said about there being an additional stage here for testing and design, this also gets back to what we were discussing earlier related to FEVM. If there's an issue discovered during testing, are we going to be able to make very quick changes without needing to go through community consent? It seems to be the preference of the group and how quickly we're moving that the answer is yes to that. But we still need to have some kind of public transparency around it. So as long as, again, speed is sort of our operating value for how we make design decisions for this process, I think it's going to be really tough for us to get to this place, but it might be a longer term goal for us, if that makes sense.
Yeah, makes sense. Molly?
Yeah, I think, if anything, to me, it seems very healthy to have a bias around speed, because these sorts of protocols and processes tend to get longer and more complicated, and eventually your development slows to a halt, or becomes yearly releases, that sort of thing, which is like just not at the speed of improvement that we definitely need to see this year. We have a lot of really exciting things that are coming, and something that adds, for example, quarter-long overhead post-implementation to discuss and ship seems like a huge waste for the entire network. But I do completely agree with what Ayush was saying of like, there is a back and forth between, it is not feasible to write a spec without doing any sort of implementation and actually have a clear understanding of what's in that spec and the implications, cryptoeconomic implications, the security implications, the usability implications. Like, as we saw, not only we spec'd it, we implemented it, and until we fully integrated the implementation into the live network, I mean, that has its own problems. We didn't have a clear understanding of the pros and cons of the FIP until like the last minute. And that's bad. We should avoid that. But I think it means that there is a period of like, we like the thing that this is unlocking. And we generally agree with the high level way it's being implemented. However, it's in an ongoing like iteration period. And there's like a, does it land in the next upgrade, or does it need to keep being within that iteration period? This FIP has like general broad support, and it gets targeted towards a release and gets finalized, hopefully at the time frame where it's not, it's like close to having landed the bounds, like, been live in a test net. People have been able to like experiment with it, like that sort of thing. And I think FEM is actually a really positive example in that area, because like, FIPS were open early for that overall alignment and community support and experiment, feedback loop from a design perspective. So it's been a long process. It's been live, iterating upon, but like characteristics visible in testnets since like July. And so, there is this overlap and iteration back and forth between like the spec itself and the implementation and the performance characteristics and the implications, having all been looked at by many different groups, and that we should aim to create that overlap in the interest of making sure that we're able to actually ship these improvements quickly and not introduce a lot of buffer time that will cause us to fall behind and not actually achieve our goals.
Yeah, thanks. I can see a theme maybe emerging here and from some chat comments that it may be possible. I don't know whether or not it comes as a FIP stage, but there's some distinction between an acceptance of the goals and acceptance of the policy decision that's being made by a FIP, like an acceptance that this is where we want to head, separated from the sort of final implementation. We understand all the impacts, like real acceptance that this is the spec that we should implement.
And maybe there's from my vantage point, there is a difference between like the spec, for example, the spec of the FEM as a hypervisor that works in this way, that adds EVM on top, like that is way more detailed than like, great, we want to have a virtual machine. Like, I don't know, like, sure, you can do that in 20,000 different ways, but like there's the FIP in significant technical detail. And then it's been implemented in a live network and tested the bejesus out of it. And it's like code and bug fix and like audit complete, all of which introduce like minor changes, but maybe aren't affecting the overall big picture design.
Yeah, I mean, from my point of view, the FM is a good example of like the good acceptance of the policy of like, here's where we want to go. From where I'm sitting, like the FIPS are lacking a lot of technical detail right now. A lot of extremely relevant things are not specified in the existing FIPS, and we're waiting for like 4 more FIPS to come, which I expect will have those. But we're like talking about the same thing. It's a matter of degree here. I think. Raul.
Yeah, I think, sorry, I think FEM M1 was likely a little bit more of an example of that than M2. I think M2 had significant uncertainty that we've been mapping out, and therefore I would have personally liked to open a prefib, several prefibs maybe 2-3 weeks ago, when like most of the big decisions were already solidified, and we just like had to refine and iterate upon those. Of course, we were heavily bandwidth constrained, and this, like, it was physically impossible to do that. However, I do think there is something, so there is already a pre-acceptance stage and sorry, a pre-FIP stage, and that is a FIP discussion. And we've been using FIP discussions for this to gather signal in terms of motivations, in terms of goals, in terms of overall appetite for this particular change. So my question to the group is, how does introducing, and I'm pro introducing a pre-acceptance stage, but I want to make sure that we reconcile this with what a FIP discussion will ultimately turn out to be. I think there's a lot of value in forcing these initial sketches to take the form of a spec, a pre-semi-normative spec, and like a spec that we can iterate on with a audit trail with commits and PRs and so on, so that the changes, like you can't do this in a FIP discussion, right? You can't point out specific lines that you do not agree with in a usable manner. So I think there is a ton of value in having that pre-commit stage or confirmed desirability stage take a normative form as well. But semi-normative form, but we need to figure out how that deduplicates with having a FIP discussion.
Yeah, thanks, Raul. I do think you're onto something there. Both that, yeah, I think it needs to take the form of like a design proposal, you're proposing concrete design decisions and a review of those decisions. And I think FIP discussions sometimes it sort of depends. There's a range of things that people can post into FIP discussions on the way to a FIP. Some of them are more or less normative. But I think one concrete difference would be an actual decision being, FIP discussions, can be crickets, and that's often okay. But sort of an active decision, an active acknowledgement probably by the core devs that, like, yes, this is a direction we want to go. We expect this FIP to be approved if it doesn't, surprise us.
Yeah, just wanted to add a second point there, and I think this might be related to FIP 47. FIP 45. The execution gas, I said it in the chat, execution gas is very unforgiving. And I think there is a place here where core devs, as they implement and they find that gas is an impediment, they should also somehow be committed to refactoring the underlying logic, data structures, and so on for better performance. Execution gas is measuring ultimately the number of instructions. And of course we need better tooling to actually profile where the cost is coming from. And I think this might be the big blocker. So in allowing us to take the right decisions, to optimize the right things, so that this actually getting to a point where you implement the thing only to realize that execution gas is just slamming the whole proposal is a really bad place to be. And currently we are not able to actually solve for that at all because we lack the ability to profile. And I think that would be the next step to unblock, to actually, yes, we need this pre-commit stage, but also minimize the amount of times that we're actually going to see ourselves in this situation.
Thanks. I'm not sure what the rest of our agenda is, so I'll yield here if someone thinks we should move on.
We have a quick ad hoc updates from Stefan, and also I want to walk through some of the changes for core dev. So if you want to take 5 or so more minutes, we could afford it, but otherwise we can move on.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you.
Oh, I think Stefan, we'll give you time at the very end if that's okay.
Great. Yeah. So I don't expect, if there's no more hands, I won't take any particularly more time. There seems to be a thing coming out here that, like, maybe we do need there is some kind of notion to be formalized here, and we can probably take discussion about how to do that offline.
Yep. All right. Thanks, Alex. Yeah, I think it's clear that the theme of the day really is governance, and not to be too localized to the FIP 36 experience, but I think one of the big takeaways is that there is a significant increase in momentum around some of the nuanced components of the way we're governing right now. And we've been discussing it internally at the foundation, but we may actually need additional meetings, unfortunately. specifically for discussing and proposing governance, quite like the way Filecoin Plus manages now with their governance calls, so that core devs does not continue to get overtaken by these conversations, which, albeit important, are not necessarily something we're going to always have time for if we stay on a monthly schedule. But today, what I wanted to do is quickly run through the changes that we've been discussing for several months to core devs. These are not really changes so much as just documentation updates. For the past couple of months, these have really been this sort of uncodified standards that we've leaned on. But again, with more demand, more people joining this meeting, and with continued questions of, is this a core devs question? Should this go elsewhere? Should I figure this out within my team? Wanted to use really clear standards to help bring us all in alignment, and also align what Filecoin is doing with the trajectory that other protocols have taken too. So very simply, what is a core dev? Core devs as a group is a technical governing body, providing us with the capacity to make decisions. Right now, a lot of our work is relatively open-ended, right? We have FIP editors who also oftentimes serve as core devs. We have core devs who will go in and review FIPS, participate in the governance forums. All of this is fantastic, but having sort of a very clear understanding of what this group is being assembled to do is important, so that as more needs arise in the future, or even in the present, again, as we see more attention and demand on our governing capacities, we have a group that we can use as sort of a benchmark or a jumping off point, okay? So the ask is that core devs are engaged in knowledgeable groups of experts, and they are also folks who are interested in committing work and effort beyond their immediate domains. I would really like to distinguish going forward between a core dev and an observer. The only real difference being that core devs take on and opt into more responsibilities related to, again, reviewing FIPS, participating in more meetings. They want to be here and they want to sort of do those extra activities that are really necessary for sort of a strong body, versus observers, who are people who want to join the meeting, maybe a few meetings, they have some relevant knowledge or expertise for topics that are being discussed now, but perhaps they do not necessarily participate in reviewing FIPS, participating in governance conversations long-term, et cetera. They have local knowledge and they'd love to contribute that and know what's happening within the group, but they don't necessarily want to take on that added responsibility. Next slide, please. All right, so some really quick FAQs that I'm hoping are very helpful is who can become a core dev? Should be anyone, but not necessarily needs to be everyone. We've long sort of relied on sort of the general open source sense of meritocracy. If someone asks to be a core dev, we can ask the group, and as long as no one disagrees or has a substantial reason to, they're welcome to join us. We do not want to have really hard and fast or quota-based requirements for what you have to do to be a core dev. We want this to be something that you choose to do, that you opt into, you want to participate in this group. And as we develop those norms of what is good behavior and good participation, we do want it to be flexible. But we'll say that it may not be necessary for an entire team to join this meeting. There should be better ways of reporting out information. These meetings are recorded, there are public meeting notes. And we are continuing to move towards refinement so that these meetings are just more efficient and we know who the list of core devs actually is when it comes time to actually making harder and faster decisions or consensus bound needs for the team, okay? How are core devs herded? Async and in person with public transparency. We're going to begin moderating the core devs channel on Slack a little bit more closely, especially as we bring on more team members to help us with this. And the ask is that if you're having technical discussions, they still happen publicly in the FIPS channel. If you have sort of an administrative or a planning question or want to raise a security concern, that can go in the core devs channel, which is a private channel. How are core devs governed? Hopefully by themselves. This group should be self-governed. No one person gets to decide how this group ought to run or what its rules ought to be. And even what I'm presenting here is not necessarily my primary reflection of how we should operate, but again, is taken from months and months of conversation around this. Okay. And last, how do they make decisions? Through group consensus. And this is really a norm and a behavior that I'm hoping that we can build upon in the coming weeks and months. Next slide, please. All right. Let me quickly check the chat because there are lots and lots of comments I've seen. Jennifer quickly asked, is core dev the same as folks in Phil core dev channel? It should be. I'll talk a little bit on my final slide real quick about some of, again, those documentation changes that you'll see. But we'd also like to have a public attendance list as part of the Core Devs repo, just so everyone can very clearly see who is a Core Dev. We will also keep track of observers, which are those people who just join meetings kind of on an ad hoc or one-off basis as part of meeting notes going forward. And as a jumping off point, we're just going to use the Core Devs list that was used for the FIP36 fill pull process. I'd also like to note that this is not supposed to be like an exclusionary or very difficult thing. If you're not on the list and you feel you should be, just let me know. If you're on the list and you don't really want to participate, we can remove you. If you get removed, you can be brought back in the future. No one will ever be kicked out without warning or notice. We want this to be an expansive group that relies on everyone's expertise. It's just that we want to also have some benchmarks and some rules so folks know what's what, and that there's less uncertainty going forward. Okay. Just checking in on the comments also. Okay. All right, so we can address these, and I'm sure folks will have comments and reflections. But again, talking about Core Dev responsibilities, this is where I want to sort of shift the conversation away from the expectations we've discussed previously and for months into a new tweak to the FIPS process dependent upon Core Devs. So in this bottom piece, in rare cases, casting votes and contributing to collective decision-making for emergency and crypto economic FIPS. This is a need that really arose during the FIP36 process. And I think as Stefan is going to suggest in just a couple of minutes, it may be a need very imminently to handle some other crypto economic changes that folks within the network are hoping to make. If you could skip to the next slide, please. Okay. So just as a preliminary sort of way to sort of set the stage, we are a young protocol undergoing rapid technical development. When it comes to governance, there's lots and lots of standards or best practices in different communities we could rely upon. But as long as the emphasis, again, tends to be a bias towards speed, we want to make sure that things are publicly accountable and rules-based to the best of their ability without being really high friction, okay? And so the way that we tend to approach this is for FIPS that are overwhelmingly technical, right? Which is a very ambiguous concept. But are those which tend to provide sort of a net operational or interoperability increase. They change sort of the function of the network by adding capabilities to it, et cetera. FEVM is a great example, right? It's improving something that is a net positive for this community, even if there may be resource costs associated with it. These are the kinds of things that benefit from the soft consensus that we usually go through. It's very, very easy. Community members are still fully welcome to participate. Everything is publicly documented and open, but it does provide flexibility for us to make big and complicated technical changes to the network without necessarily needing to vote, without necessarily needing to convene or reach very difficult consensus around things that many people still are unable to really fully participate in because of their complexity. The point, though, is that there are rare FIPS on this bottom piece that do not follow this pattern. This is what we saw with FIP36. And we need to begin thinking of making slight tweaks to our process so that we can sort of absorb the shock from them, okay? So we may need to make very complicated crypto economic changes. There may be a situation in the future where some security vulnerability is discovered and we need to land a FIP immediately, right? These are things that, again, are very rare. But we should have procedures for them in advance so that we can absorb them when they happen. So next slide, please, Lucky. Okay, so this is the current process for FIPS with sort of a highlight in this middle section for what core devs are currently asked to do, okay? Most governance happens during these beginning phases, and this is where we ask community members to participate. We want them to lean into the idea in the drafting stages, and when we get to last call, we want sort of it to be very easy to understand sort of the concept of what is being proposed. Very few community members tend to weigh in here. It tends to mostly be driven by FIP authors still. And as was raised during this meeting, we want to create ways to better manage and implement some greater nuance during these latter phases as well, so that we can be responsive to testing requirements, testing needs, spec changes, et cetera. And what we're actually shipping onto the network is high quality and trusted, okay? Next slide. What I propose changing is that for certain FIPS, which we consider crypto economic FIPS, Lucky, if you could click once more, we introduce a slight tweak, which is here. And it is instead of going only through a soft consensus process that we ask core devs to publicly consider whether to accept or reject the FIP. This is not necessarily to change the process. Everything else is the same. Community feedback will still be a huge driver. As we saw during FIP 36, many core devs themselves felt very conflicted about how to vote on the FIP because of what they saw as feedback from storage providers. We want that to still be a driver. But with these things, which can be very existentially challenging to certain stakeholder groups or community members, there is still going to be a need to make a decision for the health of the overall network. And it's why I would recommend, much as the case with other protocols as well, that we begin to rely on core devs to help us make those decisions, okay? Similarly, next slide. Same thing for an emergency FIP. The only thing difference is that these are the kinds of scenarios where we may need to make a decision in days or even hours instead of months. And hopefully the idea here is we've never used something like this, but if we ever need to in the future, we have a procedure in place that we know what to do. It's not to say that these procedures cannot change. It is not to say that in only 5 stages they are perfect or the nuance is fully understood. But as is typical, I will put together a whole documentation, a whole set of documentation for this, which will be available this afternoon. You can take a look at it, and for the sake of time, I'd encourage async discussion around this. It's, again, a very small change, I think. It's something that we've been discussing and that has actually been asked for in different ways. But I think it is important that we do consider and make a decision very quickly, again, because of some other crypto economic FIPs that we know are coming down the pipeline, which Stefan has joined us to talk about briefly. I don't want to cut off this conversation, and I'm very happy to continue to have it, but there are 5 minutes left. And Stefan, I think that's a good segue for you to introduce what you'd like to talk about.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. This is great. Would you mind giving Porter the ability to share his screen while I'm setting the stage here? But
Sure.
First, as you mentioned, we want to move faster, but at the same time get, of course, feedback from the community. And so as an outcome of the 36 and sort of the current challenges that we've seen in the market, we have started the discussion on GitHub that Porter will share in a second here, where we sort of collectively with the storage provider working groups, because we have weekly storage provider working groups with I think 6 regions now, right? So the US, Europe, Asia, Singapore, Korea, and so on, where we are collectively working on what are all the programs to help create a better or a more stable and robust network and demonstrate utility and deliver credibility and stability overall to attract more customers to our network. So there's a couple of problems that we're focusing in on. One is sort of like at core, like in a lot of discussions that we have, and Porter can give some more details. There's a lot of discussion on the outcome of FIP 36. There's a lot of SPs that actually want to continue with a slight variation of it that would incentivize long-term participation, right? And so there's a couple of things we have to go do here. So our goal of this discussion is to really share the feedback that we're collecting through these storage provider working groups, and then also the outcome that we want to propose as basically a FIP that comes out of this. And so Porter, maybe you can share a little bit of the details because this was just posted 2 days ago, but we'd like to ask everyone to participate and also track this, because this is something we would love to see a new FIP as an outcome of this conversation based on the feedback we're getting from the SPs. And obviously our hope is to get this into version 18 if possible. I know this is a really tight schedule, so we wanted to make sure that everyone's aware of what we're doing here. So Porter, maybe you can walk a little bit through the process that you've been following, and
I just want to lead off with obviously usability is of primary concern to storage providers, and this really isn't a discussion on overall usability. It's about some of the other things that we can do to set us up for longer term success, longer term participation. And, this was, again, when you want to level set on what the problems are as you go into any discussion, especially with storage providers. But, as we have these discussions within the working groups, there is a consensus around what they would like to see within the market. And that really goes to longer term participation, which translates into what the deal duration is. And why we're raising this discussion now is that we have an opportunity to increase the deal duration from 18 months to 5 years. 5 years, which is probably universally the most accepted term by the storage provider working group. And that's based on, a lot of client conversations that they're having that, obviously we're not as tuned into. So we're relying on their feedback. And, that's where we want to level set with the community, present problems, understand what the priorities are. And where we want to evolve this to is just saying, hey, this is what's coming out of the storage provider working group. There is a chance for us to include this in the next network upgrade if there is universal acceptance. But overall, storage providers are all about, what are the small, quick wins that we can do to move fast that aren't so controversial. Obviously, if you go into longer term deals, that will inevitably bring up the question of the multiplier. But we're taking this one at a time. And this is something, how do you start this conversation to make sure that, the community is seeing the prioritization similar to the storage provider working group?
Thank you, Porter. So in the next couple of days, you will see more comments posted, specifically, as we said, the outcomes of the conversations we're having in these working groups, so we can share it not just with SPs, but also token holders and other ecosystem partners that are interested in the ongoing discussions. But this time it's basically built, with the SPs in the room, and it's sort of driven by them as well. So thank you for giving us the time. We'll share more updates and we'll follow up in the next call.
Great. Thanks also for jumping in last minute, Stefan and Porter. Your timing is perfect. We're right at the top of the hour. As usual, a packed meeting and lots of follow-up. Lucky will meet with everyone who's presented today to make sure he has all of their materials and share with core devs. Again, as usual, we'll continue to have async discussions. If you have any urgent needs, concerns, major issues, please flag them in the channel. Otherwise, have a lovely holiday, and we will see everyone in the new year.
Molly, you want to squeeze in a final thought?
People have dropped, but oh, sorry.
Yeah, it's longer than I'm concerned that we didn't have time to discuss what I think is a really important critical proposal, of which we have still future discussion on. So maybe this is just a flag that, like, hey, conversation is still open. We didn't actually get time to converse about it. Let's bring it up in our next core devs meeting. And actually, if we're talking about hard consensus with 55 people in a way that limits group core dev participation, like, to me, it's just misaligned. Like, the way that we have designed core devs is not a voting body. It's not a that's not how it works. The way that we have been using core devs in the past is generally implementation teams across the board. We're like, hey, yep, we plan to implement this thing. This seems like it's good for the network. It's super rough. And so I disagree with the points of, like, this has already been a hard, majority rules governing body. Like, I don't think that's the case. Like, I don't think that's how core devs has been designed. And so if we want to create that body, which I can understand why we have the needs around it, like, we need to create that as a separate thing from what core devs is. Maybe it is choosing a subset of the core devs community to step up into that role such that they can make fast emergency decisions or high context decisions on XYZ FIP in a fast, like, voting validator based sort of way. But I don't think that is, one, a limit on the participation in forums like this core devs community call, or our core dev Slack channel, where we coordinate on network upgrades, where people, across the Venus team and the Forest team and the Lotus team need high context within those areas, want to be heavily participating in the design, implementation, iteration on that. But that is different from a majority rules, great, okay, one of those teams becomes like 10 times larger, like it's subject to various different issues along those lines. And so I think we need to refine that corner and probably just also make space for future discussion upon that, because I think there's a lot of, there's people, I don't feel like it's solidified yet.
All right. Great. So as mentioned, yeah, these conversations are not just to happen here. They will continue as they usually do. I actually think Alex is right that what we're getting really hung up on is a misunderstanding of labels and terms. But we want to make sure that what we have is actually like a really solid organizational structure that's leading to better outcomes and providing more capacity for us to move forward with more complex FIPS. So we can continue to make small changes and tweaks, but we should continue to have this conversation because it will be needed urgently.
One small bit, I don't fully agree that it's just a labeling thing, right? Like I think like it's okay to have votes and governing bodies, but I feel like we should take a step back and define what the principles and criteria. And then like, sure, if we want to vote, let's like go back to the drawing board and really like craft a sustainable governance structure instead of saying, oh, all right, sure, it's a label, we're going to shuffle the definition of the label, but we haven't really gotten down to what constitutes that label.
We have worked on this pretty extensively, and there is documentation around this, which is also already linked in the presentation as well.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, we can discuss more, but I just feel like we haven't really gotten down from the first principle reason why certain groups should be represented, and then can we like define that super clearly, and also not just the definition, but also the composition and the why.
Yeah, so
I agree with
go
that.
into it
I
in
don't
this
think
meeting.
Okay. Are we going to put this on the agenda for the next one? Because I think it's an important area, and I agree that I don't think it's a labeling. It's not a label, it's issue. It's a responsibilities and like, you know, it's adding new governance expectations. I think the same things that Raul was flagging in the chat. It's like, wait, I've been a core dev for the past 2 years, but suddenly there's this new expectation and responsibility that is not what I signed up for, not what was expected of me as a core dev. Like, how does that work, and should I still be a core dev in that future model? And so like that's it, there's a feeling of an expansion of responsibility there, and it's not just a labeling thing, it's a additional responsibilities piece that I think should be broken out from the core dev label.
Okay, good flag.
Cool, we're out of time, but a great call. We can move more to async. All right, thank you guys.
Great, thank you guys.
Bye.